Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're doing something a little different.
Mm.
We are taking a deep breath and opening up a collection of historical strategies, a handbook, if you will, that codifies the unwritten and often, frankly, brutally cynical rules of influence and power dynamics throughout history.
And this material, it's not about ethical guidance, right? It's not a moral compass.
Not at all.
It's a very stark, dispassionate reflection on how human nature actually operates in the halls of power, whether you're talking about a 17th century court or, a 21st century boardroom.
Exactly. The underlying premise is it's uncomfortable. We might pride ourselves on living in a society that values fairness and decency, but what this material warns is that adhering to those principles too rigidly.
Playing by the rules too literally.
Yes. It's a recipe for being exploited or just, crushed by those who recognize the underlying game.
Right. And that's the core tension we're investigating.
It is. It's this paradox of modern life. You have to project this image of being good, civilized, compliant.
But internally, you must assume, really, that most people are operating purely out of self-interest.
So our mission today is to pull the most actionable, surprising, and sometimes pretty shocking strategies from this deep well of maneuvering. We're focusing on how these masters of influence manage to make people bend to your will without their realizing what you have done.
And that mission is grounded in what you could call a Machiavellian realism. Niccolo Machiavelli, who's cited early in these strategies, he really lays out the foundation.
What's the core idea?
He says, any man who tries to be good all the time is bound to come to ruin among the great number who are not good. And that guides the entire approach.
So the strategy is simple to state, but probably incredibly difficult to execute.
Oh, absolutely. Wear the velvet glove of public niceties, but always, always maintain the iron hand inside a velvet glove. If you can master that indirection, that timing, that psychological manipulation.
Then you attain a power that meets surprisingly little resistance.
Exactly. Because people feel they arrived at the decision themselves.
Okay, let's unpack this. We're starting with the first major pillar of this power dynamic, one that applies, equally well to a political candidate or a social media influencer today.
The alchemy of image controlling visibility and perception.
This isn't about merit, is it? It's about manufactured charisma and spectacle.
It all begins with what the material calls recreating the self and commanding attention. This is Law 25. The idea is, if you accept the role society assigns you, you accept its limitations. You accept its obscurity.
So if you're starting from zero, or even if you're established but just unremarkable, you have to forge a new, unforgettable identity.
A new identity. And this new role has to be constantly maintained, and most importantly, it must never, ever bore the audience.
The ultimate illustration of breaking that mold has to be Amandine Lucille Aurore Dudevant,
Who became known worldwide as George Sand.
Right. She was an aspiring writer, arrives in Paris in the early 1830s. And the constraints placed on women then were, they were absolute.
Completely. Financial independence was virtually impossible outside of a supportive marriage or, sadly, prostitution. She was defined by her gender, and that defined her access to professional life.
Absolutely. And when she first approached a male editor with her work, the dismissal she received is just crushing.
It's the summation of society's expectations at the time. He told her, "You should make babies, madam, not literature."
Wow. Not even about the quality of the work.
Not at all. She realized that just writing well wasn't enough. She had to fundamentally change the playing field. Other women writers before her had tried to conform to fit into that secondary role society allowed them.
But Sand decided to just obliterate that role entirely.
She did. Her strategy was radical. She essentially adopted the outward life of a man. She wore men's trousers. She smoked cigars in public. And most crucially, she took that masculine pen name, George Sand.
So what was the net effect of this calculated drama?
Total liberation and immediate attention. The male attire, it granted her a mobility and an access that no woman of her era possessed.
So she could go to libraries, coffee houses.
All of it. Salons, unescorted and unnoticed, or rather noticed, but granted the respect of a professional peer. Her identity became a permanent spectacle.
By choosing a role society had deemed impossible for her, the independent, free-thinking male author.
She commanded attention that guaranteed she would never be obscure. She solved the fundamental problems of finance and access in one bold, theatrical stroke.
That's the strategy for gaining power from obscurity. But what about maintaining it once you're established? That demands constant magnification.
Which brings us to Julius Caesar, who was an absolute master of integrating spectacle into his political life.
Caesar understood that power required a stage. He wasn't just a general or a politician.
No, he was an actor, constantly perfecting his public persona. The material notes his penchant for the most spectacular purple robes.
Purple being the color of royalty, right? It's an undeniable visual statement.
Exactly. He didn't just walk, he performed.
And even his personal vanities, they became strategic assets. It's well known he was sensitive about his receding hairline.
Right. And his vanity about baldness wasn't just a personal quirk, it became integrated into his image management.
How so?
He loved receiving the honor of the laurel wreath from the Senate. Now, officially, it's a symbol of victory, but it also served the very practical purpose of hiding his baldness.
So he co-opted a high political honor to manage his physical appearance?
Essentially, yes. He was ensuring that even in moments of ceremony, his image remained heroic and flawless. And beyond that, he was always incorporating surprises into his speeches, staging these extravagant public spectacles.
Using trophies and captives from his campaigns.
Especially from his Egyptian campaigns, to continuously enhance his character, making him seem not just successful, but genuinely larger than life.
Okay, so if Caesar's spectacle was about enhancing established authority, what about the person whose sole product is attention itself?
That brings us right to the ultimate showman, P.T. Barnum.
Barnum proved that attention is the most valuable commodity and that it must be ruthlessly acquired and guarded.
He was the first to truly commercialize human curiosity. He realized that every crowd has a silver lining. He didn't care what they came to see.
As long as they stopped.
As long as they stopped. To create interest, you had to do something different, something odd, something inexplicable.
I find the psychological mechanism he describes just fascinating. It's this magnetic effect of confusion.
Precisely. If one person stops to watch something that makes no sense, and Barnum's classic example was paying a beggar to just lay bricks in the middle of nowhere.
For no reason.
For no reason at all. More people will automatically gather asking, what are they looking at? The crowd, like dust bunnies, it gathers itself, and once the crowd is there, Barnum knew he could redirect them into his museum or his show.
The key is that the initial spark has to be unusual enough to bypass their rational thought.
Yes. But the sources also show he wasn't just some nice huckster. He was ruthless about protecting that attention.
Let's talk about his war with Peale's museum.
This is where we see the Iron Hand fully exposed. When Barnum tried to buy the American Museum, the owners, who were a bit skeptical of his reputation, they sold it to his rival, Peale's museum, instead.
And Barnum's response was not resignation or diplomacy.
Not even close. He launched a massive, coordinated, scorched earth campaign in the newspapers, using anonymous letters, opinion pieces, the whole toolkit.
And what was his target?
He attacked the reputation of Peale's owners directly. He called them a bunch of broken-down bank directors. He warned the public that buying Peale's stock was dangerous and that the museum was about to collapse.
And it worked?
The campaign successfully ruined their reputation and drove the stock values straight into the ground. This forced the American Museum owners to back out of their deal with Peale and sell the property to Barnum instead.
The insight there is just brutal.
It is. If you are locked out, and if your reputation isn't strong enough, your only recourse is to ruin the reputation of your competitor to clear the playing field. Attention is a zero-sum game, and Barnum played it with total aggression.
That's a stark lesson in controlling visibility. And yet, if the examples so far emphasize maximal presence, the very next law offers the absolute counter-tactic.
The value of strategic absence and scarcity, Law 16.
The principle of scarcity. It applies to people as much as to diamonds.
Exactly. If you're seen and heard from too often, if your circulation is too high, you just appear common, and your perceived value goes down.
So if you're already established and respected, a temporary calculated withdrawal actually increases admiration and respect.
It forces others to remember what they loved about you when you were present. You have to learn when to leave before the audience gets tired of you.
Louis XIV managed this dichotomy masterfully at Versailles. He made sure that he was rare, but his nobles were constantly available.
That was the heart of his court control. He demanded that high-ranking nobles live permanently at court, forcing them into this constant, anxious visibility.
They were always competing for his attention and favor.
And it prevented them from returning to their own power bases and, fomenting trouble. The king, however, controlled his own scarcity. His appearance was an honor, theirs was mandatory.
And what happened if a noble tried to exercise their own strategic absence?
If a noble showed up rarely, or hardly ever, he incurred the king's full displeasure. The most powerful line Louis XIV could deliver was when one of those absent nobles requested a favor.
What would he say?
The king would simply and chillingly state, "I do not know him." And that judgment was often irrevocable. It was a psychological masterstroke. He controlled the visibility of everyone around him, forcing them into dependence while making his own appearances scarce and therefore priceless.
The power of the vacuum of power is maybe even better illustrated by Deioces, the arbiter of the Medes, way back in the 8th century BC.
Deioces was this powerful figure, essentially running the government by arbitrating all the disputes. He was spending all his time on other people's problems.
Right.
But he suddenly decided he'd had enough. He complained publicly that he was neglecting his own affairs, and so he retired completely, despite being integral to the entire system.
This was clearly not a genuine retirement. This was a highly calculated political maneuver.
Oh, absolutely. He was calculating the exact political void his absence would create.
And what happened?
The subsequent chaos increased crime, contempt for law. It was severe and immediate. Society began to unravel because the central figure of justice was gone.
So the Medes were forced to convene and basically plead for him to come back?
They begged him to return and rule under an orderly government. His strategic withdrawal gave him the ultimate leverage. He was able to dictate his terms, transitioning from an arbiter to their first true king. He successfully leveraged the fear of disorder and the terror of the power vacuum he himself had created.
A stunning example of using absence to gain ultimate control, which requires a deep level of foresight and emotional discipline. And that discipline leads us directly to the next requirement: concealing intentions and cultivating unpredictability. Law 17.
The material here is very, very skeptical of honesty. It argues that most people are open books, believing that honesty wins hearts.
But this is characterized as a fundamental delusion.
Yes, honesty is described as a blunt instrument that bloodies more than it cuts. And why? Because being predictable makes it impossible for others to truly respect or fear you. And without those two elements, power is shaky.
So power requires constant vigilance over what you reveal. You have to constantly monitor your tongue, tailor your words, tell people what they want to hear, rather than the unfiltered truth of what you feel.
Exactly. And the moment you drop that discipline, even for a joke, the consequences can be fatal. Look at the tragic case of Kondraty Ryliev, sentenced to death by Tsar Nicholas I in 1825.
He was being hanged.
And in what was truly a sign of providence, the rope broke. He dashed to the ground. Historically, a failed execution like that was often taken as a sign from God, leading to an automatic pardon.
He was given a literal miracle, a second chance at life.
He was. And in a moment of reckless, arrogant verbal indiscipline, he couldn't resist joking. He yelled out to the crowd, "You see, in Russia, they don't know how to do anything properly, not even how to make rope."
Oh no!
A messenger relayed the miracle to the Tsar, who was already starting to sign the pardon documents. But when the Tsar inquired about Ryliev's comment and he heard the insult,
He tore up the pardon.
immediately. The Tsar stated, "In that case, let us prove the contrary." The next day, Ryliev was successfully hanged.
That fleeting moment of verbal indiscretion, it negated a literal miracle and sealed his death.
The lesson is that even in moments of existential stress, a powerful person has to maintain tactical silence and calculated composure.
And conversely, great con artists thrive on exploiting the predictability of their victims and then injecting total surprise.
Yes, let's talk about the Yellow Kid, Scholl, and his massive scam to fleece a man named Giesel of $35,000 via a fixed boxing match.
Weil played on Giesel's primary weakness, which was greed.
Of course. Giesel had handed over his cash because he was convinced he was in on a sure thing. He'd watched the rehearsal of the fixed fight. He knew exactly what was supposed to happen. His predictability was the trap.
But Weil realized that to prevent Giesel from seeking revenge or reporting the crime, he needed a final psychological masterstroke.
Something that would override his victim's greed entirely.
And that's where the surprise came in, the fake death.
The moment the money exchanged hands, one of the boxers suddenly appeared to drop dead, spitting blood. Weil had coached the boxer to use chicken blood and hot water hidden in his cheek.
And the accomplices.
The millionaires Weil hired as accomplices immediately panicked, rushing Giesel out of the gym. Giesel fled back to Chicago, utterly terrified that he would be charged with murder.
So he gladly left his 35 grand behind.
He considered it a small price to pay to avoid being implicated in a crime. The final horrifying surprise negated his fundamental motive greed and created a psychological barrier that ensured his silence.
That transition from greed to terror is a perfect setup for our next section. The soft sell working on hearts, minds, and weakness. This is all about bypassing brute force.
And getting people to truly want to do your bidding.
This is encapsulated in Law 43, seduction over coercion.
The material stresses that coercion. It just creates hatred, resentment, and eventually a violent, reactive counterforce.
But seduction is surgical?
It operates on individual psychologies and inherent weaknesses, turning the seduced person not into an angry victim, but into a loyal, willing pawn.
We use the classic analogy for this, the north wind and the sun.
And it's a perfect analogy for understanding the difference between temporary compliance and deep conviction. The north wind, representing force, it blows violently, trying to strip the traveler of his cloak.
But the cold and the threat only make the traveler hold the cloak tighter.
Exactly. But the sun, representing charm and seduction, starts by shining moderately and then gradually increases the heat until the traveler, willingly and naturally, removes his own cloak.
The sun gets what it wants without resistance or animosity.
And this strategy is demonstrated beautifully by Emperor Sung of China, who employed this kind of calculated generosity to win deep, abiding loyalty from his enemies.
Take the case of his rival Liu.
When Liu was finally defeated and brought before Sung, the emperor offered him a glass of wine. Liu, fearing it was poisoned, a very common fate for defeated rivals, he cried out begging for mercy but accepting that he deserved death.
And Sung's reaction was stunning.
He simply took the glass from Liu's hand and swallowed the wine himself, proving it wasn't poisoned.
That gesture transcends military victory.
It does. From that day forward, Liu became Sung's most trusted and loyal friend, bound not by fear of the sword, but by the profound experience of unexpected mercy.
The emperor didn't just win a battle, he won a heart.
And we see this again with Chan Shu, who had been defeated, but was still actively conspiring to kill Sung. Sung's ministers wanted him imprisoned. They had documents proving the plot.
But the emperor chose a different path when Chan Shu visited.
Sung honored him publicly, then gave him a sealed package, telling him to open it only halfway home.
And in the package
was all the documents detailing Chan Shu's murderous conspiracy. Chan Shu realized instantly that Sung knew everything, his murderous intent, the details of the plot, but had chosen mercy, publicly honoring him despite the evidence. This overwhelming generosity just broke Chan Shu's will to resist,
winning him over entirely.
and securing him as another loyal vassal.
So what about the practical fiscal side of this strategy? The material connects generosity directly to a leader's renown, using the story of Pharaoh as a warning against excessive frugality.
This is a powerful and it's a non-obvious point. Moses was famously impatient for God to destroy Pharaoh for his blasphemies and his tyranny. But, the story goes, a voice from the truth told Moses that as long as Pharaoh continued to provide abundant food, comfort, and security for his creatures, he would not be destroyed.
Why?
Because 1,000 times 1,000 of God's servants were enjoying bounty and tranquility under his rule.
So the stability of Pharaoh's reign wasn't contingent on his piety, but on his capacity for providing comfort and resources.
Precisely. His decline, the material argues, began only when he grew worried about resources and started deducting food for his creatures, having daily rations. This excessive economy was viewed as a sign of decline, a betrayal of the primary duty of a ruler.
So generosity, symbolized by giving a daily banquet or ensuring comfort, is essential for a leader to gain renown.
And to sustain loyalty in a way that mere military might cannot, because it speaks directly to the self-interest of the populace.
Okay, so moving from general generosity to specific targeting. If seduction is the overall strategy, the micro-tactic is finding and exploiting the thumbscrew.
Right. This recognizes that every person has a fatal weakness, an insecurity, an uncontrollable need, or a secret pleasure, the specific lever that can be turned to one's advantage.
Balthazar Gracian wrote that all men are idolaters. Some worship fame, others self-interest.
But most worship pleasure. The ultimate skill lies in knowing the mainspring of motive of the person you need to control. You have to find the key to their will.
Cardinal Richelieu, when he was rising in the French court, he provided a masterful example of finding the weak link. He operated in the court of Louis XIII, but he focused his attention on the Queen Mother, Marie de Medicis. Why bypass the king?
Because the king's favor was too changeable, it was too dependent on shifting political winds. Richelieu realized that while Marie de Medicis was politically powerful, she was fundamentally an insecure woman who desperately needed constant masculine attention, affection, and flattery.
Her psychological need was the most reliable lever.
The most reliable. Richelieu played the part of the devoted, respectful courtier, showering her with attention and respect, even flattering her favorite, Concini.
So he controlled the king indirectly through the king's unwavering filial affection for his mother, who is now utterly dependent on Richelieu's flattery.
Exactly. He secured his position not by fighting the king, but by controlling the person the king could never discard. And once Richelieu became prime minister, once he'd attained the highest office, the sources note, he immediately and unceremoniously discarded the queen mother.
The lever had served its purpose.
It had.
A more brazen exploitation of a monarch's hidden desire involved the dancer and adventurer Lola Montez and King Ludwig of Bavaria. She was determined to conquer him, using a series of dramatic, calculated steps.
Lola Montez recognized that King Ludwig was bored by conventional courtly manners and that he sought excitement. She started subtly. She targeted his aide-de-camp, Rechberg, who had a known fondness for pretty girls. By riding her horse and staging an accidental fall right at his feet, she charmed him and she secured an audience with the king.
But when the king refused the audience, claiming he was too busy, that's when she went for the shock factor.
She burst into his room, pushing past the sentries, and in the process, she deliberately tore the front of her dress, brazenly exposing her bare breasts to the astonished king.
Wow.
This was astonishing, a total violation of court decorum. But the shock, the sheer audacity, and the promise of unconventional pleasure, it worked perfectly. She secured the audience immediately and became his mistress.
It was a perfect read of the king's psychological state.
He desperately craved drama and the unconventional to escape the rigidity of his life.
These ancient tactics translate perfectly to the pursuit of corporate power, moving from human instinct to, well, data collection.
Right. Consider the art dealer Joseph Duveen, who essentially monopolized the market for selling European masterpieces to America's emerging millionaire class, particularly Andrew Mellon.
Duveen realized that in that high-stakes, rarefied world, intuition was not enough.
He needed absolute intelligence on his targets. His mainspring of motive was the client's taste and ego. Duveen made it seem as though everything he offered, down to the exact painting size and style, was precisely what Mellon was currently dreaming of.
How did he manage this feat of perfect timing?
Industrial-level espionage. He secretly put members of his client's household staffs, butlers, cooks, footmen on his payroll.
No way!
Yes, this gave him constant, unfiltered access to private information. Their comings, goings, changes in mood, what books they were reading, and most crucially, any private comments about art or acquisitions.
So his meticulous espionage made his rivals think he had a sixth sense for the client's desires.
Because he literally knew what they were thinking before they articulated it to anyone else. He weaponized their private lives.
That is the thumbscrew applied to the desire for exclusivity and taste. Finally, in this section on the soft sell, we have the calculated fantasy.
If reality is mundane or oppressive, the person who can successfully spin a grand, spectacular fantasy has untold power.
People crave escape. They love what is grand and spectacular.
But the material emphasizes that for this power to be sustainable, the fantasy has to remain to some degree unrealized, always mysterious, and just beyond grasp. If the charm is easily consumed, people tire of it quickly.
And Mata Hari built her entire career on this principle, despite not being the most skilled dancer in Paris.
Her success was not built on skill or conventional beauty. It was built entirely on the atmosphere of mystery she created. She understood she was selling interpretation, not execution.
So she invented an exotic, aristocratic origin story, which was completely false.
Completely false. And she used costumes that were deliberately startling and minimal. A white cotton brassiere covered with Indian-type jewels, a revealing sarong. She presented her dances not as performance art, but as sacred mythology from Indian or Javanese traditions.
Her performance was a constant tease.
Precisely. She was always changing her story, always adding new details to her past, always surprising the audience. The power lay in the mystery being perpetually ungraspable. Because the audience could never fully seize the reality of Mata Hari, they never tired of constant interpretation and discussion about her.
What cannot be seized creates lasting power.
Exactly.
That distinction between the graspable and the unrealized is key to long-term influence. Now, let's transition into navigating the danger zones. Masters and rivals. These are the strategies you use when dealing with people above you and people beside you.
We start with the fatal danger of outshining the master.
This is a vital rule for anyone seeking promotion or mentorship. Superiors adore requests for help and advice.
Because they love bestowing the gifts of their experience. Their ego is invested in their seniority. If you are more intelligent, the law advises, you must conceal it and seem the opposite.
This requires extreme tact. You are basically told to discreetly flatter them by making them feel indispensable to your success.
Yes. The tactical advice is to commit harmless mistakes, non-critical errors, that allow you to ask for the master's help or counsel, making him appear wiser and more intelligent than you. This way, you direct his goodwill, not his rancor, towards yourself.
You succeed, but he feels responsible for your success.
That's the key.
The consequence of failing this lesson is dramatically illustrated by the engineer and consul Mucianus during a siege.
Mucianus, the consul, requested a large mast for a siege machine. The engineer, whose expertise dictated a better solution, decided that he knew better. He insisted on sending a smaller, more effective mast, ignoring the explicit order.
He thought Mucianus would reward him for the superior result and the innovation.
But the superiority of the subject, even if it's factually correct, is fatal because it attacks the master's ego. When the smaller mast arrived, Mucianus flew into an absolute crippling rage.
He couldn't focus on the critical siege.
Because all he could think about was the engineer's impudence, the disobedience and the implied superiority. The fact that the engineer knew better than the commander were infinitely more offensive than any military setback or logistical failure.
The material is very clear on this.
It is. The superiority of a subject over his prince is not only stupid, it is fatal. As the analogy goes, the stars may be brilliant, but they never appear in the company of the sun.
That's how you handle the superior. Now, horizontally, we face the insidious poison of envy.
The sources suggest that envy is felt to be more shameful than even felonious crime, and so it's rarely confessed, but it lodges in the heart, not the brain.
Meaning no degree of intellect can supply a guarantee against it.
Right. And envy is almost always stirred up by success, proximity to power, and perceived superiority. Look at Michelangelo, who received immense favors from Pope Julius II, including a literal private drawbridge built from the Vatican corridor directly to his studio.
That intimacy and those immeasurable favors naturally stirred up immense envy among his peers.
Absolutely. And his rival, the architect Bramante, capitalized on this envy perfectly to undermine him.
Bramante was driven by a professional fear that Michelangelo's success would lead to the exposure of his own architectural errors.
He couldn't attack Michelangelo's talent, so he attacked his favor indirectly. He used superstition, planting the idea in the Pope's mind that it was unlucky to build one's tomb in one's lifetime,
Thereby turning the Pope against Michelangelo's prestigious tomb project.
which removed Michelangelo from the Pope's intimate circle and focused attention elsewhere. Envy works by finding a plausible cover, in this case superstition, to mask its destructive intent.
This destructive power of envy, once it takes root, is seen up close in the contemporary tragedy of writer Joe Orton and his partner, Kenneth Halliwell.
Halliwell's decline was rooted in this profound, festering envy over Orton's explosive literary success. He was reading Orton's diaries, observing his growing fame, and it just fueled his own sense of inferiority and failure.
And Orton's attempts to help Halliwell launch his own art career, they were disastrous.
Because Halliwell didn't register them as help, he registered them as charity and guilt.
It seems once that envy takes root, any attempt to help or mitigate the success only accelerates the venom.
It makes it grow. The only options for Orton were stark. Either severely downplay his success and achievements, or physically flee the viper of envy. The material suggests that envy is irrational and immune to reason or help.
And the greatest mistake, exemplified by Sir Walter Raleigh, is actively flaunting that superiority, thereby manufacturing enemies.
Raleigh made a great show of his versatility, his intellectual prowess, his many skills and qualities, imposing them on everyone he met.
He genuinely thought this display impressed people.
He did. He thought it enhanced his image. What it actually did was create a vast network of silent enemies who felt inferior to him every time they spoke with him. They waited patiently until his slightest mistake to ruin him.
While Raleigh was executed on charges of treason, the sources emphasize that this outcome was merely the mask that accumulated envy finally used to deliver its fatal blow.
That's it. To counter all these dangers from masters and rivals, you have to strive for the indispensability mandate. If you are replaceable, you are vulnerable.
The condottieri, the great mercenary generals of Renaissance Italy, discovered this the hardest way.
They won battle after battle, but as they grew older, more expensive, and started acting impudently and independently, they became liabilities. They were then banished, imprisoned, or executed.
Why?
Because they were replaceable. Nothing of lasting value was lost by killing them. Their power was taken for granted, and they failed to entrench themselves beyond their momentary usefulness.
So, how do you make yourself indispensable? The material outlines two primary paths to this essential security.
The first is intensive power, and that's exemplified by Michelangelo. This relies on one singular, highly specialized skill that others cannot easily replicate. Michelangelo was the only person who could deliver the Sistine Chapel ceiling or the Medici tombs.
This intense specialization offers greater personal freedom.
Right, because the individual doesn't depend on a single position or master for security. They depend on their unique talent.
The second is extensive power, the Henry Kissinger model.
Kissinger survived the volatility and bloodlettings within the Nixon administration, not because he was Nixon's loyal friend, but because he deliberately wove himself into the fabric of too many departments, crises, and political structures.
To remove Kissinger would have led to utter chaos.
Exactly. He was so extensively entrenched that his removal would cause all sorts of interdependencies to unravel, creating a dangerous administrative vacuum. His structural importance became a powerful shield.
And the ultimate lesson here.
It echoes Machiavelli. It is better to be feared and depended upon than loved and disposable. Love is subtle and changeable. Fear, or the fear of catastrophic consequences, is controllable.
That brings us to our final and perhaps most sophisticated section, the strategy of time, patience, and flexibility. Power isn't just about what you do.
It's about when you do it and how you manage the dimension of time itself.
We start with choosing the right pace. The perfect analogy for strategic pacing is the hawk.
You circle patiently and silently, high above, taking in the full field, seeing all the movements below. You are patient, all-seeing, but those below do not realize they are being tracked.
But when the precise, undefendable moment arrives,
The hawk swoops down with extreme speed, striking the prey before it even comprehends the threat.
we see this calculated delay used masterfully by Mehmed the Conqueror in 1473. He was engaged in a military campaign against Uzun Hasan in the east.
Which left his western flank highly vulnerable to the Hungarians.
So to protect this vulnerable flank, he lured the Hungarian emissary into negotiations for a temporary peace.
But these negotiations were a deliberate military strategy of time distortion. He didn't meet the emissary immediately. Instead, he made the Hungarians chase him eastward, forced them to wait through lavish but time-consuming ceremonies, banquets, gift exchanges.
So the diplomatic process itself became a form of military defense.
Exactly. Mehmed kept the Hungarians distracted and delayed until his primary military objective against Uzun Hasan was fully achieved. Only when his flank was secured and the danger was over did he finally meet the emissary.
Not to negotiate, but to offer excessively harsh, non-negotiable terms.
That amounted to a dismissal. He weaponized delay and ceremony to gain critical military time.
And the opposite of the decisive swoop is the power of perseverance. Sertorius demonstrated this beautifully with the analogy of the two horses and their tails.
He showed his troops and allies two horses. A strong man tried to rip the tail off a weak horse in one brute motion and failed, completely exhausting himself.
Then, a weak man quickly stripped the second horse's tail bare, one hair at a time.
And Sertorius' conclusion was that steady, continuous, incremental effort is irresistible. You can't overcome every difficulty with a single brutal exertion of force, but little by little, perseverance is more effective than brute strength.
The weak force, applied continuously, always wins over the strong force, applied spasmodically.
That's it.
The next crucial element is controlling emotional reaction. Overreaction is described as the cause of so many problems that could have been avoided. We see this with Kissinger's reaction to the Pentagon Papers.
That volcanic rage created the plumbers unit, which ultimately set off the chain of events leading to the Watergate scandal and Nixon's downfall. Had Kissinger simply ignored the leak, the scandal would have eventually faded.
But his immediate, visceral, volcanic anger made the leak a big deal.
And it forced the creation of a shadow organization whose subsequent illegalities were far more damaging than the initial leak. The key is to keep your head while others are losing theirs and turn their loss of control to your advantage.
This links directly to the strategy of non-resistance. If you are pushed, you should yield, turn the other cheek, or bend.
This is counterintuitive, but it's powerful. Yielding neutralizes the opponent's expected behavior as they anticipated force or argument. Your surrender in this context is never defeat. It's a tactical retreat.
A necessary part of a larger, subtle plan to lull them into believing they have definitively defeated you.
It buys you essential time to regroup, to undermine them, or simply to wait for their own inevitable mistakes.
Chow Chow, during a critical battle in the War of the Three Kingdoms, demonstrates perfect composure in the face of betrayal.
When documents surfaced proving that several generals were conspiring with the enemy, his advisors urged him to arrest and execute them immediately to preserve honor.
But Cao Cao instead ordered the documents burned and the matter forgotten.
Why? At that critical moment, demanding justice or expressing anger would have called attention to the disloyalty, which would have instantly damaged troop morale and threatened the entire battle. Justice could wait. He prioritized the immediate strategic moment and kept his focus narrow, dealing with the generals later, discreetly.
You contrast that strategic silence with Napoleon's response to Talleyrand's betrayal.
Oh, it's a polar opposite. Napoleon lost control completely and publicly raged at his former minister.
And Talleyrand was the master of composure.
He maintained his dignity and composure throughout Napoleon's tirade. By forcing the emperor to display his complete loss of cool in front of witnesses, Talleyrand humiliated him profoundly,
The word quickly spread that the great emperor had lost his emotional balance under fire.
signaling to everyone around them that this is the beginning of the end. Anger blinds you and limits your options, a luxury the powerful cannot afford.
Finally, the ultimate goal of flexibility requires embracing formlessness. The danger of being successful or growing older is that you become predictable and rigid.
And predictability is characterized as the first sign of decrepitude. It makes you vulnerable to ridicule and bold enemies who can easily anticipate your next move.
So the formless strategy means deliberately not giving your opponents anything solid to attack.
You have to be elusive, like a vapor, causing the enemy to exhaust themselves pursuing you without ever pinning you down.
Sun Tzu refers to the ability to gain victory by constantly changing and adapting according to the opponent as genius.
Formlessness is the only path to true surprise. Mao Zedong used this strategy against the nationalists during the Civil War. He adopted movements that were wide-ranging and abstract, like the strategy in the game of Go, forcing his opponents to scatter their forces mentally and physically, just trying to track him.
They couldn't fathom his overall purpose in a simple, linear way.
Not at all. And what was the tactical outcome of that formlessness?
It allowed Mao to break the nationalist forces into small, isolated, manageable units.
And when he finally chose to engage, he would overwhelm those small pockets with powerful, concentrated blows. The constant change and retreat was simply bait. As the maxim goes, the enemy advances, we retreat. When we want to fight, we make sure you can't get away and we wipe you out.
Formlessness ensures that by the time the enemy figures out your location or purpose, it is always too late.
Always.
That is an exhaustive and sometimes chilling view of the historical strategies governing human influence, from controlling perception to commanding time itself. Let's quickly summarize the three pillars for you, the learner.
First, power is achieved through the calculated image over sheer substance. Your identity is a dramatic role you must create and continuously maintain, like George Sand or Caesar.
Using spectacle like Barnum or strategic absence like Dideoces to control how common or rare you appear to be.
Second, the necessity of finding psychological levers. Forget coercion. Power works through seduction, appealing to the self-interest, insecurities, or secret pleasures of others, the thumbscrew.
Whether it's Richelieu manipulating the Queen Mother's need for affection or Duveen paying household staff for private intelligence, you have to know your target's primary motivation.
And third, the supreme importance of strategic timing and emotional control. Be like the hawk, patient, all-seeing, and decisive when the moment strikes. Avoid emotional overreaction, which limits your options and hands power to your rivals.
Like Napoleon or Kissinger.
And embrace formlessness and unpredictability to prevent your enemies from having anything solid to attack.
But we have to return to the core paradox here. These strategies demand perpetual, relentless movement, constant attention-grabbing, and strategic engagement. They force you to be an actor in an unending play.
And yet, Law 16 explicitly demands the use of absence to increase respect and honor.
This creates an existential tension, doesn't it?
It does. If perpetual visibility and attention are required to maintain power, how can a truly powerful person ever stop moving, stop being seen, or stop fighting without creating the very vacuum that a rival will immediately fill? The system demands perpetual performance and engagement.
The sources show the tragic human cost of this unending cycle. The first emperor of China, after successfully unifying the nation and achieving ultimate power, grew so terrified of human contact that he traveled and lived in constant disguise.
He died alone and in secret, far from his family and court. His body had to be transported back to the capital with a cart full of salted fish trailing behind.
To mask the smell of his rotting corpse, all to conceal his death from rivals long enough to ensure a stable succession.
His perpetual need for control, his need to maintain the image, it consumed him entirely, leaving no room for peace or reality. These strategies teach that power requires perpetual struggle and relentless maintenance.
So we leave you with this provocative thought. If the ultimate goal of these influence tactics is control and security, is the pursuit of power an unending cycle that leaves absolutely no room for the peace it often promises, consider how these ancient psychological tactics, often masked in modern polite language, manifest in the political and corporate worlds around you today. Thank you for joining us on this